Imagine living 30,000 years ago. There are no hospitals, no DNA tests, no last names, no birth certificates, no science classes, no biology textbooks. One day, a woman in your tribe realizes she is pregnant. Months later, a baby is born. Today, determining who the father is can be as simple as taking a DNA test. But for most of human history, that technology didn't exist. In fact, for tens of thousands of years, people had absolutely no way of knowing for certain who a child's biological father was. And that raises a fascinating question. How did ancient humans know who the father was? The answer is much stranger than you might think. To understand the problem, we need to forget everything we know about reproduction. Today, even young children understand that a baby is created when genetic material from a man and a woman combine. But ancient humans didn't have microscopes. They didn't know what sperm cells were. They didn't understand genetics. They had no concept of chromosomes or DNA. All they could do was observe the world around them. And observation can sometimes be misleading. Ancient people certainly noticed that pregnancy often followed sexual relationships. But understanding that one directly caused the other wasn't always obvious. Think about it. A woman could become pregnant weeks after having sex. The connection wasn't immediate. There was no visible process linking the two events together. Because of this, many ancient societies developed their own explanations for where babies came from. Some believed that spirits entered a woman's body. Others thought ancestral souls chose to be reborn. Certain cultures believed sacred places, rivers, animals, or supernatural forces played a role in creating children. To us, these explanations sound strange. But without modern science, they were perfectly reasonable attempts to explain one of life's greatest mysteries. Eventually, however, humans began noticing patterns. A man who spent time with a particular woman often saw children appear months later. And sometimes those children looked remarkably similar to him. Maybe they had the same eyes, the same nose, the same facial structure, the same hair. These similarities were impossible to ignore. People may not have understood genetics, but they understood resemblance. A child who looked exactly like a certain man was difficult to explain away as coincidence. Over thousands of years, these observations slowly helped humans connect sexual activity with reproduction. But even after making that connection, a huge problem remained. What if a woman had more than one partner? Which man was actually the father? Without DNA testing, there was no reliable answer. And this uncertainty created one of the most important social challenges in human history. Because knowing who the father was wasn't just about curiosity. It affected survival. Children require enormous amounts of care. They need food, protection, shelter, teaching, support. If nobody knew who was responsible for a child, who would provide those things? Different societies solved this problem in different ways. Many cultures created social rules designed to reduce uncertainty. Marriage is one example. Today, marriage is often associated with love and commitment. But historically, it also served practical purposes. One of those purposes was establishing parental responsibility. If a woman was married to a man, the community generally assumed that he was the father of any children born during the marriage. Was this always true? Of course not. But it provided a clear answer that allowed society to function. In many places, certainty wasn't necessary. Agreement was. People simply accepted a social understanding of fatherhood, even if biological certainty was impossible. Some societies took an even more surprising approach. Instead of trying to identify a single father, they believed a child could have multiple fathers. This idea sounds bizarre today, but it existed in several cultures throughout history. Anthropologists have documented groups in South America where people believed that a fetus could be formed gradually through contributions from multiple men. According to these beliefs, if a pregnant woman had relationships with more than one man, all of them contributed to the development of the child. As a result, all of them could be considered fathers. Strangely enough, this system may have offered certain advantages. A child with multiple recognized fathers potentially had access to more resources, more protection, more food, more adults invested in their survival. In harsh environments, that extra support could make a significant difference. Human societies have always been remarkably creative when solving problems, and uncertainty about paternity was one of the biggest problems they faced. Over time, As civilizations became larger and more complex, questions of inheritance added even more pressure. Land, property, power, titles. All of these things depended on family relationships. Suddenly, knowing who someone's father was became extremely important. Kings wanted legitimate heirs. Families wanted clear inheritance lines. Communities wanted social stability. The uncertainty that had existed for thousands of years became increasingly difficult to tolerate. As a result, many cultures developed stricter rules regarding relationships, marriage, and family structure. Not necessarily because they understood genetics, but because they needed predictable social systems. What's fascinating is that for almost all of human history, nobody could ever be completely certain who a child's father was. Mothers always knew a child came from them. Fathers had to rely on trust, observation, social agreements, and sometimes pure guesswork. Only in the last few decades has science finally provided definitive answers. Today, a DNA test can determine biological parentage with astonishing accuracy. A question that puzzled humanity for tens of thousands of years can now be answered in a matter of days. But when you step back and think about it, that's actually incredible. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, one of the most important pieces of information about a child was never truly known. People built families, tribes, kingdoms, civilizations, entire social systems, all while operating with a degree of uncertainty that would seem unimaginable today. So how did ancient humans know who the father was? Most of the time, they didn't. Not with certainty. They observed similarities, created traditions, built social rules, made educated guesses, and trusted the systems their communities had created. For thousands of generations, that was the best humanity could do. And somehow it was enough, because the real story isn't about how ancient humans identified fathers. It's about how they managed to build entire civilizations without ever being completely sure.